Hi. I'm about to share with you pieces of my life story. I sure wish my words to inspire you. We've all been paying a high price for not being fully ourselves. It took me a few decades to transform my life and learn to accept and own it. And I did it with the power of words. When I was 5 years old, I already knew that I should not lie to my father. He would either beat me up or use another punishment against no tears, pleading or asking for forgiveness would help. Nevertheless, that day, on the way back to the kindergarten from a short trip with all the kids, I saw my home just across the street and could not contain myself. I ran across the street, which was my father's one big no-nos, continued frantically down the stairs, and found myself standing in front of his figure, hardly breathing. At 10 a.m., I told him kindergarten was over for the day. So he grabbed my wrist, walked me fiercely back to the kindergarten, and sure enough, found out what he had suspected. Back home, he left me outside the door, in the scary, lonely, empty backyard with no food, water, or company until sunset. I didn't cry that day in the backyard. I didn't even knock on the door or call my mom. After 5 years of trying to pave my way into my father's heart, yearning for him to see me, pleading for his love, that day, out in the backyard, I unconsciously chose what I later called a double life. A life that has two channels. The external channel, in which we expose our good parts, the funny, the bright, the fit, all of which are true but don't include all our parts. And the internal channel, silently vibrating inside but hiding very deeply, are vulnerable parts which are never to be revealed to anyone. In this channel lies what I call the unspoken conversation. So here are some examples of what my double life looked like. 1, for years in the external channel, while talking to audiences, I looked bright, funny, eloquent. But underneath it, the unspoken channel was agonizing with self-loathing and shame. 2, people would come to me as an expert seeking my help. In the external channel, I knew how to support their healing, even with remarkable results. But inside, I would torture myself with the belief that I don't know anything. So how can I even dare to work with people? 3, most of my life, I've been blessed with love and appreciation. But the unspoken channel, convinced of my unworthiness, told me that I was deceiving people. So I was never able to really take in their love. 4, in the external channel, men wanted me. Great, no? But in my desperate search for approval and love, I said yes to going to bed with many of them when my body was screaming no. 5, since I vowed early on to always hide my vulnerability, I learned to fire back very quickly. Little did my father or many others know how terrified I felt inside, internally believing their judgments about me. As you may have noticed, the unspoken channel looks like a mess of self-judgments and negative beliefs. But there's more to it. Underneath the judgments, well hidden inside, resides our precious, vulnerable, true self. In that hidden core, we all long to be seen, understood, accepted, significant, loved for who we are with all our parts. What blocks this channel from becoming visible and spoken is our fear of the pain of being misunderstood and mistreated instead. This is why, over years, we cover our vulnerable core with additional layers of acquired false beliefs. The tragic result is that with no one around to contradict these beliefs because we all share them, they become our reality. We learn to behave according to our internalized stories about ourselves until those become our identity. So what gave birth to my long life vow, unconscious yet so powerful, never to expose my core? It was not the physical punishments of my father. It was his words. What led me that day in the backyard to stop speaking my truth was born out of the continuous annihilating accusations my father used. Whiner, you don't deserve to be here. What you did just now ruined everything. In later years, when the words became whore and you're a lost case, I fully internalized and totally believed his story about my supposedly terrible nature, and the double life took over. Unfortunately, my story is not one of a kind. Millions of children get treated in ways that bring them to the same results. Guided by their worried parents and the educational systems into becoming acceptable adults, they live in an existential terror of not being accepted for who they really truly are. Gradually, many of them find their version of a double life, hiding their true self and giving up on their dreams. In the name of belonging, they practice being nice, obedient, social beings. Later on, when they become parents, workers, neighbors, bosses, educators, leaders, they pass on to others the same harsh worldview, language, and assumptions, which claim, A, that there is a right way to behave, which we all should live by, in order to be accepted and included in the human tribe. B, that people are to be judged based on their good or bad behavior, and to be punished or rewarded accordingly. These almost unquestioned assumptions have led humanity to use anger and violence, physical and verbal, to invoke fear, guilt, and shame, so as to create obedient children and submissive masses. It's much easier for a few to control many in this way, isn't it? And this is precisely what my father, too, tried to achieve. In his well-intended efforts to make life easier for me when I grew up, he worked so hard on molding and taming me during my early years that my whole being changed. Since he was supposedly the one who always knew what was best for me, I had no choice as a young, dependent person but to believe him in order to survive. So if my father knows and I'm always wrong, then I had to acquire the false identity of I don't know anything as my true self. All this might have continued for the rest of my life had I not discovered Nonviolent Communication, NVC, which became the main path of my liberation. I learned to shed light on deeply hidden, unspoken places. I learned to listen to and question my judgments instead of blindly believing them. I learned that underneath my thoughts, a pure, primal, human material was pulsating. So I embarked on the path of speaking the unspoken conversation because the unspoken material kept waiting there for me to redeem it. Here is how I came to my own answers. The first step in stopping the painful path of the double life was to connect with myself and find out what was happening underneath my habitual patterns of thought and behavior. The process entailed identifying my judgments, inquiring about their origin, and understanding what they were covering up, my long-forgotten human needs. In order to practice the compassion that this process required, I used two main strategies. When I caught myself thinking a painful thought, I trained myself to first stop gently, and then ask myself questions about that thought gently again, instead of believing them automatically and without questioning as I had done for years. Along this vulnerable, scary journey of self-inquiry, I was also exploring my old painful belief of I don't know anything. And to my amazement, I realized that what I was actually yearning for was the opposite of those words. I wanted to learn to trust myself. This discovery was a huge turning point in my life. Amongst others, it enabled me to end my second marriage. After 10 years of believing that he knew for me and that I had to change in order to deserve his love, I no longer needed my husband to serve as my savior. I could finally do it for myself. And with much patience, which was essential for the scared parts to have enough safety and trust to show up, I've managed to unveil vulnerable parts that the little girl buried well inside. Thanks to this new, courageous path of compassion and curiosity, I have reclaimed my laughter, boldness, love of performance, and care, and accept them as natural gifts. And I've also been honored and humbled to support thousands of people to discover their own true self. What I've been teaching them, and I'm excited to share with you today, is this exact process of speaking the unspoken. As our truth gets clearer and clearer to us, the second step is to learn how to express it to and with others so they can hear us very differently. When I say speak the unspoken, do I mean tell others what's wrong with them at all times? No. Do I mean judge without mercy? No. This is not speaking the truth. This is hurting. Yet this was the only language my father knew. But having learned to understand myself in a totally new way, I came to the sweet place of also seeing him with compassion. I realized that he was trying to give me what all parents aspire to give to their children: the best education and conditions to prepare me for life. I could see the purity of his intentions behind the words he used. 2 years before he died of cancer, for the first and last time in his and my life, my father expressed regret about what he had done to me. By then, it was too late for him to face the huge changes he would have to make to live differently. If he had had the tools to acknowledge his fear, confusion, despair, and loss of self-trust, if he had shared these vulnerable emotions with others all along, instead of turning them into anger and violence, might he have lived longer than his 59 years? I would love to think so. How many of you are parents? How many of you have reached out with vulnerability to your own children, letting them hear your unspoken truth, modeling what courage and listening really are, helping them to know you and discover their own vibrant heart? Speaking the unspoken is precisely about that. It is about sharing our true human needs, what we really cherish and value. It is about learning to ask for what we want and opening our hearts to others, be it our children or our enemies. I want to name 3 of the most powerful liberations this process gave me. 1, learning to say yes only when I mean it. Then my no also looked different, as I knew how to explain it instead of barking it desperately. 2, learning to hear a no for what it is, which is someone is not willing to do what I asked in that moment because he or she prefers to do something else, not because they're negating me, as I was so trained to believe as a child. 3, the epitome of my new self has been the release of all guilt. Hey, I no longer believe that I don't know anything. I now not only trust and even love what I know, I have learned to stay open and curious to what I don't know without any guilt or fear. Enter the 3rd step of this process, listening to others with open heart. When we stop hearing the judgmental words of others as true descriptions of ourselves, we can then explore where they are coming from. Because in moments of distress, challenge, confusion, they, like the rest of us, are afraid to expose their vulnerable truth, so they express it in painful ways instead. With gentle, curious questions about their feelings, needs, values, yearnings, which hide under their words of blame, we can together with them, discover their emerging truth. This way, with our authentic, empathic listening, they can regain the trust in the care of other human beings. Then they, too, are able to open themselves and listen to themselves and then to us in this same way. And we can all heal together. How many of you were blessed with this kind of listening as children? This is what I hope my story will inspire you to do, to choose the path of speaking the unspoken conversations with yourselves, with your spouses, friends, children, with your parents too, by the way. I want to conclude with a real-life story that nourishes this hope for me. Last month, I co-led an NVC retreat for women, Palestinians and Israeli Jews. At one point, in response to my invitation to express uncensored truth out loud, an Orthodox Jew and a religious Muslim almost simultaneously exclaimed to each other, "I want you out of here," namely out of Israel. I then delicately supported them in finding their unspoken truth. Together, we found deep pain, terribly unmet needs, and historical longings, all buried underneath the shield of mutual hatred. With support, they heard each other deeply, connected with each other's pain and needs, and gradually lowered their guard. It took an hour and a half, and magic happened. Once fully heard, the Muslim woman said, "I actually don't want to live without my Jewish neighbors." And the Jewish woman said, "Yes, we were given this land, and I'm willing to share it." This is possible right here and now. You don't have to wait for the entire world to change. You don't depend on others' readiness or availability. If you can change the way you speak, so you can speak from your heart, even if you're scared of the consequences, if you can invite others to speak their truth despite your fear, and if you can change the way you listen once others speak, you too can create magic. Now, always. Thank you.